welcome back to Tlhalosement. This is Mama Rope, and we are on starting with the straight line function. So before I go into this, I would like to say please do subscribe to this channel so that it can grow. The second thing that I want to make clear from my previous video is that the light was just killing my vibe when I was doing that family example, and yeah, if you want me to retake that scene, that part of the video, I will do that, but you have to indicate on the comment section saying redo family section. So yeah, in this lesson we'll try to firstly identify a problem, throw it into a function and understand it, okay? But then we're going to do that with a straight line function because we are starting with functions. So I'm going to choose one scenario that you're going to actually deal with anyway at the end of maybe go my fourth time. So what we're dealing with today is investment. So you want to invest money. So like with what we did with the family situation, in order for you to draw something into a function, you have to characterize it. Sorry. Take out the key components of this whole thing and now investigate how these things relate with each other, okay? So the first thing that you're gonna characterize out of this situation is money. There has to be money in this thing because what are we investing? We're investing money, right? So there has to be money in. Money in. You are putting in money. And the fact that you said invest, that means there has to be some kind of relationship or something that you do different to this money so that it's different from the money that you put under the mattress. Because when you put money under the mattress, the money just sits there, right? But this one, we said we are investing it. So there has to be something different. What would that be? That would be your interest. So this money is giving you interest. And the other thing is that how is it giving you this money? It's giving you interest over time, right? So we are expecting interest over time. So there is time aspect in this whole situation. And we're going to have money at the end. So there is money out. So these are the four important concepts, or should I say components of this whole situation. So because we can't just write this into our formula as words, let's try to give them some variables, like assign variables to it so that it will be very easy for us to draw a formula. So money in will be your, let's say it's a principal amount, the money you start with, principal amount. And you're going to have interest, which we're going to denote by I, and you're going to have time, which we're going to denote by N. You're going to have money out, which we're going to say is future value. This is the money that you put in, but we want to see the future of that money. How much money would it be in terms of value, right? So now what you're trying to do now is to say, okay, I want to be able to predict how much money I will have at after a certain amount of time. So that's you're coming up with, and now you're trying to draw a function that will model this whole situation. So now what are you trying to determine? The future value. That's your interest. You try to determine that. That's why the future value is the subject of the formula. So future value is what? It will be dependent on what? On the amount of money you put in. So you start with putting money so that you can have future value. You're not going to have future value if you don't have principal amount. You have to start somewhere. Now we are left with these two variables. With these two variables, there is something unique about them. Let's now talk about it so that when we put it down there, we understand what is going on here. So what we say is that there will be interest, which means there will be money on top of the money you started with over time. So depending on the amount of time you leave your money to mature, then you will have more money, right? So did you hear me say more money? That means you're going to have multiples amount of money. If you leave your money for a year, you're going to have 1/4 of the money. Let me just write it here. If you put your money for 1 year, you're going to have 1 year. You're going to have 1/4. 1/4 of the money. But if you leave your money for 3 years, let's say this is this is 100% interest money. If you leave your money for 3 years, you're gonna have 3/4 of the money. So do you see what is happening here? So that means there is an addition of money over time. So the relationship between these two will be an addition, a repetitive multiple addition of amount on top of money. So I use the word repetitive, I use the word addition, I use the word multiple. And in somewhere grade 8, grade 9, we defined a multiplication to be a repetitive addition, right? If you still remember. So that means the relationship between these two is that you're going to have multiple amounts of interest over, did you hear me? Multiple amounts of interest over time. So that means there is I multiplied by n. So you can go back to your formula there and say, if that's the case, then future value is equals to the amount I've put in, because that amount will still be in the account, plus the interest over time. That is your formula. So you have managed to actually describe this situation in terms of a formula. So before we go in, let's now look into this formula and look into the most important aspects of this, which is some of the other things that you are being asked about in other subjects. In maths you're not asked about this, but go other subjects like Woma physics, Woma biology, you are asked. So let's look into this. You have future value, which is dependent on the amount of interest over time and the amount of money you start with. So if in this situation we were to determine the independent and dependent variable of the situation, we would say independent variables, or let's start with the dependent variable first. So our dependent variable which variable is dependent on the other variables here? It's the future value. Future value, because depending on how much money you put in and for how long do you leave that money, at what interest, then you will have future value. So the future value is dependent on what you put in for how long. So future value will be your dependent variable. So if we were to put out the independent variable, so the independent variables will be your principal, your interest, and the amount of time, because depending on how much you put in, then you will get more money. You're not gonna, let's say for instance we have someone who let's do this in example format. So there is person A and person B. So person A invests 100 rand, person B invests 200 rand in the same account for the same amount of interest for the same amount of time, but they didn't start with the same variable, right? So that means they're not going to get the same amount of money. So if this is a 50% interest, let's say this whole thing is a 50% interest bank account, I mean to say investment account. So this one, for their interest, they're going to get their 100 rand plus their 50% interest, which is 50 rand. This one is going to get their 200 rand plus their 50% interest, which is 100 rand. So their total amount of money, their future value is 300 rand. And this one's future value is 150. So do you see that the amount of money that you get out of this whole thing is dependent on how much you put in? So this is an independent variable because you can tweak it, you can change it. The same thing applies for these other variables, but then we'll talk more when we get to that video. It's the next video anyway. So let me explain this situation again with another example so that you understand. So I want to explain the dependent and independent variable. So let's say you are, I'm going to use a different example. So a different example is if you have a reaction. Let's say it's a chemical reaction. So you have reactant A plus reactant B giving you a product AB. Product AB. This is product. This is a reactant. In this whole thing, you have the catalyst. The catalyst is what we put into a reaction to speed up the reaction. Yes. So now you have A and B giving you product AB, right? So if out of this whole situation we were to determine the dependent variable and the independent variable, what would be your dependent variable? Which of these depends on something to happen? It's AB, the product, right? If there is no B in the reaction vessel, then that means there will be no AB because you didn't put any B in. There's no B in. So where are you going to get AB? So the same thing applies to A. If you didn't put in any A in the reaction vessel, in your test tube, you will not get this AB. So the catalyst would be, in this instance, would be your interest, because it speed up the reaction. It's the one that makes things to happen again. So after explaining this whole thing, looking back at the function itself, this function, you would actually see that it resembles a straight line function. How do we say that? So the standard formula of your straight line function is y is equal to mx plus c, which means the output value y is equals to what you put in, which is your c, plus I, which is m, and this is n, which is your x. So basically your simple interest formula resembles y is equals to mx plus c. It's just that in real life you're not gonna get things the way you're used to getting them in the textbook. So basically, since this is positive, you can just put it around and be like y is equals to mx plus c, or you can say the way they put it in the sequence and series. You will see that y is equals to ax plus b. Yeah, something like this. So you have managed to actually come up with a problem or something that interests you, and characterize it. After characterizing it, you express it mathematically, put it in a function. Then from there you are able to actually determine dependent variables and independent variables. So I hope you are able to actually see the relationship between variables in here. In the next video, what we're gonna do is that we're gonna actually see how these variables actually affect each other, and how do they affect the graph itself graphically. We're gonna draw the graphs and see how when you tweak one of the variables, how does the graph behave depending on what you have done. So for now, don't forget to subscribe and tune in for more videos. I am signing out. Bye.